readers. Welcome to Books Connect Us from Penguin Random House. This is a podcast about staying connected with each other and the stories and authors who inspire us. Rory Power is the New York Times bestselling author of Wilder Girls. In her latest thriller, Burn Our Bodies Down, a young woman is haunted by her family's past. The book has been called a deliriously creepy tale that would keep your nightmares up at night. Now let's join our own Caitlin Whalen in conversation with author Rory Power.
Hi, Rory. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to have you so we get to hear you talk about both Wilder Girls and your new book, Burn Our Bodies Down. But before we get into all of that good stuff, I would love to hear about what you've been doing recently that has helped you feel connected or hopeful.
Well, it's been a lot of writing. I've been on deadline for pretty much the entire pandemic, which is such a strange sentence to say. But I just started slowly leaving my house, masked to the nines, and just driving around. So that's been really helpful. But also my cat. I would be remiss if I did not mention her. It's been a long time since things happened in my apartment that were not because of me. So now, hearing a noise and being like, "Oh God, that's my cat," it reminds me that other people exist.
Right, and this is your new cat, right?
Yes, she is now. I think she's approaching 4 months old now, which
4 months?
yeah, she's getting big, but she's also still incredibly small.
So she's basically the same age as Quarantine. Am
Yeah,
I right?
kind of. She was born in April, so she missed the first part where we were all really confused. And then she just came in once we were settled and knew what we were doing a little bit.
Yeah, she's a true quarantine cat, a true quarantine baby. You can just watch her grow with us.
Exactly.
So I'm sure that she's been keeping you pretty busy, but do you have a favorite activity that you have done when you're at home, or has it truly just been writing?
Writing, and then a lot of watching TV, which I would do anyway, but this is nice to have kind of an excuse. Recently, oh God, they were so good to us. They put out 2 seasons of Selling Sunset during this, and I'm obsessed with it. It is just perfect television.
Rory, I love Selling Sunset. For everybody who's listening in, this is quality television.
It's by the guy who did The Hills, so already it's God tier, but it is so good.
It's a true mountaintop.
And every time I finish a season, I don't know how they do it, but I am more angry than I was the last time. When I finished season 3, which I of course did in one day, I was about to have a stroke. I was so upset.
I wasn't even ready for it. I just sat down thinking I'm going to watch one quick episode of The Office, and then the next thing I know, goodbye everything, goodbye work.
And
just
you got to do
me and Selling Sunset.
The Instagram deep dive on all of them. I am very up to date with all their lives.
I'm right there with you. Well, now Netflix gave us Selling Sunset, but since quarantine started, you also gave us quite the gift in Burn Our Bodies Down that came out in July.
Look at that transition.
Ooh, look at that, right there. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about both of your 2 books before we get too much into talking about Burn Our Bodies Down. Could you tell us a little bit about the New York Times bestselling Wilder Girls as well as Burn Our Bodies Down?
Yeah, so Wilder Girls is kind of like Lord of the Flies meets Annihilation, if those help give you a sense. It's a private school, a boarding school off the coast of Maine is put under quarantine because the girls there have started having these terrible symptoms of this mysterious disease. I did not know.
You knew it was coming, right?
I did not, I swear. But it's been, we're lucky compared to them. I'll say that, which is a weird,
I agree.
Obviously nobody here is very lucky at all, but they're having a very bad time. And one of the girls in the quarantine goes missing, and so her best friend decides to go look for her. So that's Wilder Girls. And then Burn Our Bodies Down is kind of Sharp Objects by way of the X-Files. It's about a mother and a daughter and their complicated relationship and what happens when the daughter decides to go looking for secrets about her mom's past and ends up wishing she had not. Also not having a good time. But that one is more psychological horror, I think, where
Hmm.
Wilder Girls is a little more body horror. There's still elements of both, but that's to me where
Yeah,
the
and I think that's something that you do so well. And I mean, Refinery 29 said that your writing is occasionally shocking and always gripping. Paste calls you thrilling and unnerving. And then Claire Legrand, the New York Times bestselling author, called it your book's an eerie and unforgettable triumph. So you always have this great combination of the eerie and the fascinating, the unbelievable and the gripping. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you go about piecing those two components together and kind of the genres that you like to write in? Because I think one thing we always talk about when we're talking about you, Rory Power, the author, is there's something indefinable yet irresistible about your writing.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think I always I grew up reading fantasy and so I still love reading it now. So I really grew up like immersed in speculative fiction, but I also when I sit down to write or when I first sat down to write, coming back to it, it really I really wanted to work in the contemporary setting. And so combining those two things felt really natural to me. Um and I think, I mean, I just love to take a metaphor and make it literal. That's really all it is. Like, While the Girls is an obnoxious puberty metaphor. Burn Our Bodies Down is just like, what if generational trauma were like corn? There you go. Um,
Well, we're going to talk about the corn in a little bit too, because we'll be talking about that more too, but you continue.
but yeah, I think I hope there's something anyway compelling about seeing the sort of metaphorical or like intangible processes we all go through made really physical. And especially like as a teenage girl growing up, there was so much that I felt like wasn't being shared with me, or like conversations that were being had about me but not including me, or these sort of labels that were suddenly being assigned to me as I grew up and as my body changed and what have you and blah blah blah. So like being able to see that physically and being able to like reckon with it on a tangible level, I hope is cathartic or meaningful in some way.
It absolutely is. And I think, what's really compelling about us sitting here talking in the midst of a pandemic that does feel kind of like speculative fiction. Like, who would have thought? It's the perfect time to be reading something like Wilder Girls or Burn Our Bodies Down, because it does so perfectly take in these elements that we could never imagine, and yet we do love to fantasize about them and see how they play out and kind of what secrets they unravel about the characters and maybe about ourselves as the readers. And I think you do that incredibly well, and it is something that is so gripping. It's not something I think I've ever read before. So I'll stop fangirling now. I'll move on to my next question. But with all that being said, talking about yourself as a teenager, how did you or why did you become a writer?
I was one of those kids who like I grew up loving it. I My first book, I was 6 years old, and it's called Detective Pony, and then the sequel is called Detective Pony Finds the Diamonds. So it's a spoiler about what happens in the book. He does find the
Oh,
diamonds. Yeah,
tricky.
I also illustrated it myself, so you know it's a real banger. Oh,
Ready for your graphic
I
novel.
know. I was preparing. Um, so yeah, I've loved to write since I was really little. My mom is actually a writer, so she watching her like go through the process and really approach it like an actual job really taught me from a young age that like it's possible. The names on books are not just like random people who disappear. Like they have lives. They had to work to do this, and so it's possible for you to work to do this. But once I got to like high school and college, I was very much like, no, I could never write. Like my mom's a writer, I could never be a writer. And like it doesn't seem practical. I don't want to do it. So I very firmly pushed it away and then ended up circling back to it after working as an editorial assistant, where basically all I did was actually write when I should have been working. So I was like,
Thank goodness for all of us. That worked out
I
well.
should really I should really make a pivot here. But yeah, so it's been in the family, and it's been something I've loved for a long time, but it just like took me a little while to come back to it.
Well, I'm so glad that you did. And now you're sitting here with these two amazing books out in the world. Has it felt any different this time around with your second novel coming out?
Definitely. I mean, the world circumstances alone, the book came out in early July, and it came after a month in June where we really dedicated a lot of time, but not nearly enough, to talking about the injustices that Black people face in America and in the world at large, and in what the publishing industry can do to work against its inherent biases and the systemic racism that exists in everything. And so it felt very strange to be in July suddenly like, hello, please buy this book that has nothing to
Hmm.
do with that and is about me, like a very white lady. So that has been a kind of cognitive dissonance for me. And I've tried to make sure that, like, whatever I do, it's never superseding the important conversation. Um, and also just like the fact that we're not doing in-person events. It's been great in that I've been able to talk to a lot of people I might not have been able to before, but it's also just like it's a change, something to get used to. And then like on the book level itself, this is a long answer, but like on the book
Keep it going.
level, this was just a really different book. It was the first one I'd ever written under contract, the first one I'd ever written when I already had a book out in the world. And it was hard. It's a really personal book. It ended up being much closer to the bone than think I realized when I started writing it. So by the end, I was just like exhausted, and it's been scarier to publish it and to put it out in the world, but also I think in some ways more gratifying than with Wilder Girls. Um, we can leave that part in because I got my own title wrong. Yeah, so it's been a lot. It's been complicated.
Yeah, but I love hearing about all the complicated because I think, as a reader, you walk into a bookstore and you're like, oh my God, my favorite author, Rory Power, has another book out. But there's so much that goes into that, right? There's so much thought, and even about the timing of, do we keep that pub date? Does it stay on sale in
Hmm.
July? And how do we get this story out there respectfully, authentically, and in the right way? And that does take on a lot. But I think it's been a beautiful progress so far. It's exciting that it's out there, and when people want to pick it up, they can pick it up. That's the beauty of stories,
Yeah.
right? You have all these options, and maybe not everyone can say the same, but there's literally no such thing as too many books. My TBR is like up the wall, around the corner, into the other
Oh God, we
bedrooms.
can't even talk about mine.
Well, I guess I'd also like to know, you mentioned it was under contract, but when did the idea for Burn Our Bodies Down first come to you? Like, what was it? What inspired you? What was that first image? How did that come about?
I was on the phone with my editor, Krista Marino, a Random House employee. It was
Hi, Krista.
spring 2018, I think. Yeah. And we were kind of like in between rounds of edits for Wilder Girls, and we were talking through, and she mentioned like, "Oh, what are you thinking for your second book?" And I had a totally different idea. I was like, "I want to do like a creepy convent book," and she was like, "Okay, but what if you didn't?" I was like, "Fair enough." But I didn't have any other ideas. But I was on the phone with her, and I needed to, so I opened Pinterest, and the first thing I saw was this photograph by Ellen Jansen. There are two photographs that are kind of like the same image, but from a different perspective. One's called Encounter, and one's called Threshold. And I think I saw Threshold first. I'm not sure. It was one of the two. And it's this hand kind of reaching out of tall grass, and I'm not very well versed in what plants look like what. So I thought it was corn, and I was like, so what if I did a book like about corn that's like Field of Dreams but nightmares, and like no Kevin Costner, no baseball? And Krista was like, okay, like have fun. That sounds better than the other one at least. But she was very nice, but I didn't know what I was doing. So that was really the start of it, just like pure panic and luck on Pinterest. But after that, it took a lot of like I did a lot of research into sort of farming techniques, which was so boring. But like,
I was going to ask if you grew up on a
no.
farm or anything like that. I didn't think so.
No, I grew up in suburban Massachusetts in one of the like 30 identical towns just outside Boston. But I have always
Right.
wanted to go to Nebraska since I was a kid, which I don't know why, but it was like literally on a list on my wall when I was 16 of
The
places I wanted
destination.
to go. Um,
Listeners in Nebraska, hit up Rory Power and let her know where to
I
go
know
when we
about
can all start traveling
Carhenge. I
again.
want to go to Carhenge, which is like Stonehenge but made out of cars. I wanted to work
Yes,
that
I
into
want to
the
see that too,
book,
actually.
but I couldn't. But yeah, so I just started. I had this sort of image, and I started to fill out the space around it with research and concepts that I've just always been really into. Like I've always loved like doppelgangers, and so I immediately wanted to work that in. Like I had the idea, like maybe it's like the doppelganger is coming out of the corn, and then the girl is like, "Who are you? Are you real? Am I real?" And then that was really all I had for like 6 months. Um, yeah, somehow we ended up with an actual story. It just took a little while.
I think that imagery of the cornfields, though, is something really incredible. I honestly haven't spent a lot of time thinking about corn, but I have relocated to North Carolina where I grew up, and I'm now living amongst a lot of cornfields.
Hmm.
And after reading Burn Our Bodies Down, I drive a little bit
Like
quicker
they're
whenever I'm going by
naturally
the
scary.
cornfields.
I think there's something like
They are.
inherently weird about them. And I also like there- there's a lot of like menacing corn in the X-Files. There's at least one
Yep.
scene I can think of in particular where they like run through a field of it and they're being chased by like an alien or whatever. So that I think definitely imprinted on my brain when I was 13. And I also love like I'm really inspired a lot of the time by like geometry and like just patterns in a way. So I love the that when you're driving past a planted field, at some point you hit the right speed and the right angle that you can suddenly see all the rows, like all of the
Hmm.
planting rows exactly. And then if you like speed up a little bit or you keep going, they disappear again. And I something about that, I just have always really, really been fascinated by that. And so I wanted to kind of capture that feeling of like suddenly being able to see everything crystallize, but then it goes away, and put that in the book, like literally with corn.
Well, it's also what's really interesting to hear you talk about right now is that this idea kind of came out of this one photograph, this one lightning burst of inspiration, but then also earlier we were talking about how personal this book ultimately became.
Hmm.
And I know I've heard you and I've read you talking about this generational trauma
Hmm.
and the effects of that and how that works. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was, working on the book for a while, and it took me a long time to really figure out what I was missing. I was trying to approach it in this really abstract way, and it just wasn't clicking. And I realized that I had this character sort of circling the book that I wasn't looking at, and that was the main character's mom. And as soon as I realized that, I was like, "Oh no, like I'm gonna have to talk about like
It's the mom.
the mom and the mother-daughter relationship." And I don't think you can talk about like for me at least, it's very impossible to talk about one's relationship with one's parents without then considering their relationship with their parents. And of course, you could take that back like as many generations as you want, but I
Generations.
decided to draw a line somewhere. Um, and so that made it really natural for me to add in this grandmother character who has shaped her daughter and in turn her grandchild in a very particular way. And for me, that was really personal because, my mom and I are very close now. I value our relationship incredibly, but it took a lot of work to get there. We were not always that close by any means. And I think a lot of that came from my grandmother on her side, who was a difficult woman to put it one way. She went through a lot. She grew up in Greece in the occupation, but she also passed a lot of that on to her child, and her child in turn. I think there's sometimes it's unavoidable to that we pass on the things that happen to us to other people. And that's really something that showed up in the book, this idea of recognizing the cycle that you're part of and deciding, do you want to step away, do you want to continue it? And that's where the book I think divides from my own life, and that like I think you know Margot, the main character, gets to a point where she's like, is it worth it to me to keep working on this? And she decides one thing, and I think my mom and we decided like, yes, it is, and we, are so much better for it. And like, I'm so proud of the work that we've done, the two of us. And I hope that if, a young person is reading the book, they might realize through reading it that like, it's not the only thing out there. The way that your family has created you, like, that's not the only way to exist. And you can acknowledge the things that have made you this way. You can acknowledge the patterns that exist in your family and in you, and you can let them hurt you. Like, you can let them hurt, you can acknowledge that hurt, but you can also then step away from it, and it doesn't, like, you're not stuck, I think is kind of what I hope people reading it realize. So yeah, it ended up being very like very, very much the book that I think, well, honestly, I could say I think like teenage me wouldn't need that book, but she would probably read it and be like, you don't know anything, like leave me alone. So it's a book that she probably would have hated, but like, I think,
But fortunately, it's a book that probably would have sat with her because it still sits with me, and I read it quite a while
yeah, I hope she would have read it and then been like, fine, like when she's 24, she's like, oh, okay, that book was right. Um,
ago.
but yeah, it's just, I think a lot of us have, we carry baggage that was given to us by not even our parents, but people who came even further before. And that's hard to recognize sometimes and hard to grapple with. But I hope the book not makes it easier, but just like lets people know that it's okay, and that whatever decision you make, that's okay too.
I think that's really powerful, and I think it certainly does do that. I had read an article recently, or not even recently at this point, it was before quarantine, so a whole different world away. But it was about the importance of storytelling within families and how you pass down stories from one generation to the next. And listening to those stories and sharing those stories is a really powerful way of creating a sense of place and belonging for people and community within a family. And what's so interesting about what you're saying and what Margot, the main character in the book, is going through is this idea of seeing those stories and getting something from those stories and applying it to yourself, which is what it sounds like you're hoping your readers will be able to do.
Hmm.
But for Margot, she doesn't really have those stories. Her mother has kept everything about their family and their history totally in the dark and has kept her totally separate. And a lot of the story is her going back to her mom's hometown and trying to get those answers. How did you come up with Margot's character, who is so determined and so strong, yet has such a heart and a longing for family?
That was really, I mean, part of it's like necessity. When you're working with a mystery, you need somebody who like wants to know the answer. But the interesting thing for me about Margot is that when you grow up in an emotionally abusive is what I was about to say. Wow, beautiful. When you grow up in an emotionally abusive household, a lot of the time you end up with this mindset where you don't ask questions. You do not want to disturb the status quo, anything, it's a very like don't rock the boat kind of mindset. And I think Margot really has that, where she she knows how things are with her mom. She's gotten very used to the routine. She knows exactly how fights are going to go. And then here she is in this new situation with somebody who seems to really love her. And she's like, I need to know what happened. I need to know the answers. But there's also this whole other part of me that is like, don't do that. You won't like the answer. It'll only cause trouble. Like, do what you've learned to do your whole life, which is just be quiet and sit still. Um, and that conflict to me was really the most interesting part, and also the hardest part, just in terms of writing it, to be able to balance like what the story needed, the forward momentum that the book needs, with the trueness of the character, which is that like there's a lot that she just doesn't want to know, or that she's like, I know I should be asking that question, but like I really am not going to. Instead, I'm just gonna like go in my room and sleep. um and like meshing those two really drew me in. And I think Margot came out of that sort of, that like everything about her is really built around that single conflict of like, it'll be better for me if I do find out, but here's everything that I've ever wanted is if I don't ask any questions. And that's tough. And she ends up having to really like consider which of those is more important to her and which of those is, I hesitate to say better for her, because I think being like what's good for someone can really be so subjective, but what she feels is better for her.
Yeah, and that's such a tough question. That is seeking the truth worth it? Or is the truth something that if I don't seek now, can I ignore it for the rest of time?
Hmm.
And that was kind of one of those themes that really hooked me in, where I was like, Margot, I'm desperate to know the answers here, but like I also don't want you to lose all these things that you so clearly want. And it's such an incredible tension that really brightens the story and makes you want to dive into it further. But I also know that we're running a little bit out of time, so I want to ask you just a couple more
Yeah.
questions, even though I could talk to you about corn and doppelgangers all day long. But are there any writers in particular that might have inspired your writing as well, or anybody that you happen to be reading right now?
Right now, I just started The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson, and I'm really looking forward to getting into it. I'm only like a chapter in, but I'm obsessed with it already. I've also been reading, I always love anything Christine Lynn Herman puts out. She just finished her Devouring Grey duology. The second one, The Deck of Omens, came out in April, and it's a really lovely, like, kind of small town, spooky, contemporary fantasy that deals a lot with like complicated families and queerness in really lovely ways. So I always think what she does is amazing. And other writers who really like, I felt their influence, definitely Nova Rensuma. I think her prose style is just incredible, and I'd be like very remiss if I didn't mention Jeff Vandermeer, who wrote Annihilation. I read that book. I'd written like a first draft of Wilder Girls, and I really didn't know what it was. And then I read Annihilation, was like, oh, you can write about only the things you care about? Like, oh, okay. Like, never mind then. I'm gonna do this. Um, and he's just also like been a really wonderful like mentor figure for me. And well, I hope, Jeff, if you're listening, you're my mentor. What's up? Like, yeah, and I think he just does really inventive things, and I'm always eager to see what he does next. Yeah.
That's the same exact way I feel about you, Rory. So we're coming to the end here, and my final question for you here on Books Connect Us is, how can your readers connect with you while we're in quarantine?
I am tragically very, very online. Like, I'm just all the time. So I'm on Twitter and Instagram mostly. Both of those handles are at It's Rory Power. And yeah, I'm there all the time. But I also have if that's not your jam, I also have a contact form on my website, which is itsrorypower.com. And you can email me there. I do respond. It just takes me like an epoch. So like buckle in for that wait. But yeah, I'm everywhere. Oh God, that sounds terrible. I'm on Spotify too. I make playlists for all my books, so if that's the thing that you like.
Fantastic playlist, you guys.
Oh,
everybody tuning in.
perfect.
Switch right over.
Yeah, they're like one of my favorite things to do, and they're all songs that I've listened to while writing the book. So if that's fun for you, check my socials. You can usually find me like spouting off about it there. So
And you can also find plenty of corn emojis.
yes.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It was fantastic getting to talk with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you
And
so
I
much
hope you
for
have a great
having
day.
me.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you for listening to Books Connect Us. For more great book recommendations and information about your favorite authors, feel free to follow Penguin Random House on social media or visit penguinrandomhouse.com. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, go ahead and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, as it helps more listeners to find our show. This podcast is produced by Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. I've been Erin Leaf, and until next time, this has been Books Connect Us.